pending legislation mandating cybersecurity representation at the top levels of organizations, a relatively young field, and limited understanding of the field are testing the bounds of practical cybersecurity leadership. Today's guests are Richard Brinson and Rachel Briggs. Richard is an experienced executive, board advisor, and global top 100 chief information security officer. He has been providing strategic guidance to many of the world's largest global organizations for over 20 years, with core expertise in cybersecurity, technology infrastructure, and enterprise architecture. Richard leads Savanti's cybersecurity practice, helping large organizations to transform and modernize their security functions for the digital age. Rachel is a leading expert on security and has advised governments and multinational corporations on security, resilience, terrorism, and responses to extremism. She is an executive advisor with Savanti and founder and CEO of the Clarity Factory, which provides a range of services to its clients, including research, consultancy, and thought leadership. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Pray Podcast. Richard and Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray Podcast today.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
So, Richard, starting with you, can you give us a little bit of background about who you are and what you're currently doing?
Yeah, delighted to. So Richard Brinson, I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Savanti. We are a boutique cybersecurity consultancy focused really on cybersecurity strategy, leadership, and running large-scale cyber transformations for large enterprises. Background-wise, about 22 years in security. I started off as a self-taught ethical hacker, if you can imagine what one of those is, and then moved into a little bit of forensics and various other things before working my way up through the corporates. And for the last nearly coming on for 8.5 years, I've been doing CISO roles, largely for Savanti customers. And I've been a CISO at some very large organizations, including Unilever, Sainsbury's, and a bunch of others in the FTSE 100. So that's kind of me.
Great. And Rachel, can you give us a little bit of background as well?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I'm Rachel Briggs. I'm an executive advisor to Savanti, and I've been working with Richard and his team on our thought leadership products. And what we're trying to do is to use the excellent practitioner knowledge of the whole team at Savanti, working for a combined probably many hundreds of years with clients on their cybersecurity needs, and trying to distill that along with industry-leading research to provide a kind of a roadmap for the industry on solving some of what seem to be very complicated, wicked problems that we're kind of, as an industry, we're struggling to disentangle. So we're trying to make sense of what's going on. We're trying to offer some practical solutions for practitioners, which is very much the spot that we're in. And this draws on the last 20 years of my own experience working in and around various different bits of the security industry, and with a real commitment to how really good insight and research paired with practitioner knowledge can help to improve and help our industry move forward.
So for each of you, is there something about, why did you decide now that there was a need for kind of cybersecurity leadership and having those discussions?
Well, I think it's from what we were seeing. And it's what we keep getting contacted by large organizations who are saying, we've got a problem with cybersecurity in that we don't know if we're doing the right thing. And we often get involved to come and have a look and say, okay, with our experience, this bit's going well, this bit's not going well. But the one thing we were seeing consistently is this revolving door of CSOs, of cybersecurity leaders. And there's kind of like two different sides. One is the companies that seem to go through them very, very quickly. Yeah. And is there a particular reason why a company goes through them quickly? And the second thing, we were seeing individuals who are going through jobs pretty quickly, and two potentially different causes. But we wanted to really understand what the problems could be And we wanted to understand if there's things that the organizations can do themselves to keep their leaders for longer, support them better, have a more successful journey. And if there's also things that CSOs themselves can do to maybe become a bit more business aligned, a bit more focused on not just the techie side of it, but actually how do you be an enterprise leader at the same time as being owning cybersecurity. So that was kind of the reason we got into the research, because we were just seeing it again and again. So we wanted to document why, and then use that to both educate companies and security leaders themselves on what could possibly fix this issue.
So let's talk a little bit about it. What were some of the good things that these companies are doing? What are some of the bad things that the companies were doing? And why was there this churn in CSOs?
Yeah, so we've kind of termed it the perfect storm, which is a slightly overused cliche, but it kind of summed up well. And the perfect storm, we felt there was kind of 6 really key factors that were making up this incredible churn. And the churn itself is causing companies to stand still in an industry which is moving really quickly, so effectively going backwards. And, we can dig into them in a lot more detail, but effectively the 6 were, firstly, the threat is ever increasing. The job is not getting easier. The job's getting more difficult. More nation states going after private companies. Just the size of the increase of cybercrime was huge. That was item number 1. The second one was low boardroom understanding. Right? So many boards who are taking a keen interest in it still don't really understand, how to manage cyber risk. They don't really understand, the challenges involved. They don't really know what they need from a leader. And therefore, it's quite hard for them to support those leaders because they really are bringing someone in to fix it, which is quite different from them, like any other C-suite role where, you wouldn't bring in a CFO, for example, and say, hey, you just go and fix the money for us. Don't let us know about it. Just make sure there's no problems there. So there's definitely low boardroom understanding. The third key factor is around the scarcity of talent. And we know that cybersecurity has a supply and demand issue right across the whole breadth of it. But in particular, there is a big lack of people who have had a career in cyber, so would be an SME and a cyber operator, that also then have that level of business understanding and are able to lead, take the seat around the C-suite table and go toe to toe with any other C-suite. Yeah. So there's a real lack of talent in the market. So number 4 was the spiraling salaries. So again, very well documented. CISO packages are getting higher and higher. We're hearing about them being more than CFOs in some companies, which is crazy. But that means people are moving a lot. Yeah. So people are getting offered lots more money to make a move. If they're not getting the support from the company, from the organization they're in, if their board doesn't really understand it or support them, then, they'll jump and they'll take a 50% pay rise to go to the next job. And then number 5 was around, we see this what we call hero mentality within the CISO community. And, over half of the CISOs that we spoke to, the majority, describe themselves as transformational CISOs. So if everybody's transforming, who's doing the steady state? Who's actually just keeping us moving forward and not ripping it all up and kind of starting again? And then the final part of this sort of jigsaw, the perfect storm, was the tenure is average tenure of a CISO is 2.3 years, right? So it's very, very short compared to 4.6 years for a CIO, and I think it's 6.9 years for a CEO. So the average CIO will go through, unless they start at the same time, which is unlikely, they'll probably go through, a CIO will go through 3 CISOs in their tenure, and a CEO will go through 4, right? Which is, it's kind of crazy. So all those things coming together just means there is no stability. The reality is companies, in every 3 years, they're probably only moving forward for one of those because, when somebody's leaving, when they're hiring, the first 9 to 12 months of a CISO role, they're probably understanding the company, stopping some things, starting some things, not really delivering value. So all of that means effectively a lot of companies are going backwards.
So we'll come back and dig into each of those in a little bit. For Rachel, what is some of these issues in respect to CISOs? Is it an advantage to have a CISO that has lots of experience? And what's the drawback if you can't find a CISO that kind of has the experience you're looking for in the salary range that you can afford and that you aren't afraid is going to leave you after 30 minutes?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly having both the right person at the top of that function and a really well-run function is pays dividends. I mean, what being well-run looks like in practice is quite another question. But, if you look at, for example, data that comes out of the insurance industry, which is probably one of the most comprehensive data sets that we can rely on, it speaks for itself. The companies that they describe as or they classify as cyber experts, they simply have fewer breaches. When they have a breach, they respond to it quicker and more effectively, and they're less likely to go under as a response of it. So, undoubtedly doing this and doing this well is really important. It's a competitive edge for organisations, and it's one of the things that we talk about in the paper is the fact that we're starting to see the investor community asking questions about cyber capability now. They recognise that. If they're going to put their own money into companies, one of the most important factors is how well that cyber function is run. It's not the only thing they're looking at, but they recognise increasingly that this is not just a clear and present risk and danger for corporations, but that the data on the number of organisations that can be very severely impacted or even go under as a response of not having the right capabilities in place, not understanding how to respond to it, is just too big a risk. And so, I don't think it's any surprise to us that the investor community, it's reaching the top of their question list now, because it's not only is cyber really important, but I think it's one of those touchstone issues, isn't it? If you're getting that right, you are probably getting other things right as well, because so few companies really, really get it spot on. So having that right capability, having the right leadership is a non-negotiable. I mean, delivering that in practice is quite another thing, and it's proving difficult. But I think it's the evidence is very clear that having good leadership and having the right capability is not just a good thing to have. It's kind of mission critical for companies these days. And one of the other interesting things is that this isn't just important in and of its own right. I mean, what we're starting to point to is the huge sort of business value adds of a great cyber function as well. Stage number one is getting good kind of cyber protection in place. But the companies that are really flying in this space are not just protecting themselves, the cyber function is enabling them. And so it's sort of non-negotiable, but it's also starting to be real business value add. And as I said, something that investors are really, really keen to look into and dig deeper on these days.
I mean, to me, it makes sense that this is, top of mind for investors. Investors are usually kind of leading market moves. They're trendsetters. They're looking for things on the cutting edge. So it's kind of the inverse of that, where the problem is that boards are usually made up of people that have been in their industry for 20, 30, 40 years. They're kind of, I've been here, I've done that, I know what's going on, and they're kind of set in their ways. And this whole new cyber thing is just like, that's just a fad. I don't need to worry about that. Is that kind of some of the challenge with existing boards?
Well, I mean, I'll defer to Richard, but I think one of the things that the research shows us is that there's no question whatsoever that boards are concerned about this. Study after study after study shows that the vast majority of board members who are surveyed count cyber as being one of the top three things that they're concerned about, which is kind of extraordinary, actually. But they also admit, they don't really understand it. They don't know what good looks like. They don't really understand what they should be recruiting for. And as Richard said earlier, they then end up kind of delegating it down to the CISO to just get on with it in a way that they wouldn't do for any of their other core business functions. So there's certainly a lack of understanding on most boards. I mean, we're starting to see some quite interesting things happen in the regulatory space, of course. The SEC in the US has put a number of proposals out, hasn't ruled on them yet, which would see boards need to report much more clearly on incidents, report whether they have expertise at board level, be more transparent about what their capability is within the organisation. Australia has put in place some quite stringent regulation in this space, which is, board directors face, personal liability. So I think there's a number of things that are in motion that may well force the hand. I think what we're dealing with is maybe a generational transition at board level, and a need amongst boards to recognise there's a new set of skills, there's a new set of talents and expertise that need to come into the boardroom for most companies to be match fit in the 21st century. But I mean, Richard's worked alongside boards and is a board advisor for many of our clients. So I suspect May will have some more insights to add on that.
Richard?
Just to briefly add, I think Rachel's covered a lot of the answer there. But for me, when I talk to a lot of non-exec directors in particular, who have been around for some time, let's put that in the politest terms, cyber for them has come up through the ranks really, really quickly into a board level discussion without having matured, as a corporate discipline. And I think that in itself has caused challenges around how do we effectively govern this new kid on the block from a boardroom point of view when we don't really know how to manage, the teenager in the room or whatever you want to call it. It's probably some comparables to parenting teenagers in some way, I would imagine.
I mean, is that some of the challenges that the people who have the cybersecurity industry experience don't have the boardroom and the business experience, and that you kind of have that push and shove because we're going to look down on you because you don't know how to run a business, but we also need you here because there's things that that we don't.
Yeah. I think that's a huge part of it, and we work fairly closely with some of the executive search firms on data and research. And Russell Reynolds, who one of the big exec search firms, they had a view that of those CSOs who had that boardroom experience, the sort of subject matter experts who could really stand their own in the boardroom, there's probably less than 100 in the world, and most of them are in the US, according to Russell Reynolds. So.
Yeah, that makes it a challenge when if the Fortune 500 companies all need a CISO and there's only 100 in the US or 100 in the world, you definitely have a talent shortage.
Yeah. So part of what we wanted to do in creating this series, and by the way, this is the first report of probably 4. One of the things we wanted to do is how do we change that balance, right? Because not everybody needs a boardroom level, top 100 CISO, and clearly they're not going to get it.
Yeah.
What can we do creatively to bridge that gap in the meantime? And it's probably a case of both educating boards, but also educating CISOs on what good looks like. And, maybe it's not one person's job, right, to do that thing. Maybe it's multiple people's jobs. Can we bring people from the business in, into supplement CISOs in terms of some of the gaps they may have? So that's again, some of the motivation for doing this research.
I think I would just add to really complement what Richard has said. One of the phrases that kept coming back to me as we were interviewing CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, NEDs, CEOs, and others was the phrase that, whether it was told to me or it occurred to me, was lost in translation. You've got 2 different groups of people that quite literally speak different languages, and part of the challenge here is finding a way for them to connect. And, you've got boards who just know cyber is important, but don't quite know what good looks like or what questions to ask to figure out whether they've got good or bad. And you've got some really excellent CISOs who fly at board level, but as Richard said, they're very limited in number, and the rest are struggling to articulate themselves, articulate the role of the function, and kind of bridge that gap. And as one NED who we interviewed said to us, and I'll probably paraphrase him terribly, but he said something along the lines of, they come, CISOs come in and they just don't know how to, communicate at board level. And he said, I think it's because a lot of times they don't know how to be relevant at board level. So there's a language problem, there's a relevance problem, and I guess part of what we're trying to do is to put out there a set of ideas and some practical solutions that might, in and of itself, help to bridge that gap somewhat and sort of translate what both sides need.
It's funny that you use that phrase about kind of lost in translation. I recently did an interview with Alyssa Miller, who's a CISO, and that was one of the things that she talked about of kind of why she got the role, was because she could translate things in a way that made sense to the board and made sense to the marketing department and different business units. She had that skill set to be able to communicate technical things in a non-technical way. So, if you have lots of people with the skill but not the ability to communicate it, is the need for, almost, board business training, boardroom training for high functioning cybersecurity professionals.
Yeah, we think that's definitely part of the solution. Communications training, actually addressing communication as a real thing. I mean, it's so often overlooked as something that, we just expect people to be good communicators these days. And, you actually have to be very proactive to be a good communicator. Yeah. And that's not always understood, if you've come up through a technical subject matter type route, because you've never really had to do that to any significant extent with people outside of your department so much. So I think definitely training, communications. We're seeing a lot of use of mentors. So even with very, very large enterprises, we have a client who are 300,000 plus employees. They have a CISO, and they've even hired a CISO mentor, not because they thought their CISO was lacking, but they wanted to really add additional skills, additional translation skills and capacity to that side of the role, so that it wasn't just a complete distraction from the day job as well. Because you can get sucked into that, and you can spend all your time, trying to translate stuff to the board, and actually no time getting stuff done in your own department. Yeah. So there's got to be some balance with that as well.
Are there programs out there for, even if it's not even necessarily CISOs, the cybersecurity, are there programs out there that you're aware of that help people kind of learn how to communicate on a C-suite level? Or is it just kind of those little mentors here and there that do that?
I think I know a couple of executive leadership training companies. I've worked with one of them in particular that I've taken into a few different clients, but they're a small boutique, a bit like us. They're probably 30, 40 people, all ex-senior people, or they use a lot of ex-professional sports people actually as part of their coaching because of the type of mindset as well. Mm-hmm. So they've been quite effective, and I'm sure there's a few of those type companies out there. Maybe we need to formalize that a little bit more and make recommendations about, or even mandating using the use of some of the companies like that to help get it right.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that there's the communications challenge is sort of at the pointy end right now for the CISO community because of the sort of the speed at which this change is taking place, and a group of people suddenly find themselves interacting with the board that maybe they weren't 3 or 4 years ago. So we're doing, but other parts of the business have dealt with this over the years. This isn't something that's so special to the CISO community, and we apart from the things that Richard's mentioned, general kind of leadership coaching and executive mentors and executive coaches and so on. There's a whole raft of professionals who have to learn how to kind of put their head out, poke their head outside of their own discipline, develop empathy skills so that they understand how different disciplines within the company will see what they do and find it relevant to them, communication and so on. So I think it's a broader leadership challenge, and I think it can be really helpful to think about it in that way and recognise that it's not necessarily a special set of things that are needed by CISOs. But I think one of the things that's really important to recognise, as Richard said, is that communication isn't a dark art. It's something you learn to do, and you can be taught techniques for doing it more effectively and in particular settings. And I think that's what we're saying that we need much more of within the CISO community right now.
I know, just coming from a developer background, developers and software engineers communicate with one another in a very specific way, a language that's unique to that community. And it doesn't necessarily translate out well. And even if it's not even an issue of, well, this is only a CISO issue, this is an issue with lots of companies, just with their development teams, of being able to communicate better with the marketing department, better with business units, and be able to explain the needs of why the development team might need to spend more time working on cybersecurity or do things a specific way without getting lost in the weeds of, let me show you the C# programming that's the issue, and everyone's eyes just glaze over.
Yeah.
So do you think some of it is the boards need to say, okay, we're going to bring someone to the board and we have to figure out how to communicate with them, and it may not be the way we normally communicate with the board, but we need to bring these people in and find someone that maybe we don't have the good communication with them, but we feel comfortable that we can grow into that.
Yeah, there's definitely a need, and what will become a regulated need if the SEC ruling goes ahead, to have that cyber expertise on the board. The danger with that is that everybody else on the board just says, "Oh, we got someone for this now. That's great. we hired someone to look at it internally. I've got someone on as an external advisor. I'm going to stand back. These guys are going to talk, guys or girls." And there's an even lowering of the understanding on the board even further, because they just don't need to engage on it now, or they feel they don't need to. So that's clearly a challenge.
So what should the board be doing when they're like, okay, we see this impending regulation coming, we need to get out ahead of this and get cybersecurity representation on our board? How do they go about finding a candidate in a field where its talent is so sparse, and you've got the spiraling costs and all these things that we talked about earlier? How do they go about evaluating and finding candidates?
Yeah, I mean, really difficult, right? They don't exist at the moment, let alone if this SEC ruling goes ahead and you need the demand. Yeah, demand is going to go through the roof. And you can't just take just the cyber expert to sit on your board, because they're going to have a lot more influence than just on cyber matters. If they're on your board, they're on your board, right? And they're going to be involved in various committees, discussing other types of risks, could even be REMCO, whatever that may be. So yeah, they don't exist. There's going to be a real supply-demand issue. Let's see where it goes. What we can try and do is, help educate, help advise, and help train more people into the role.
And is one of the reasons that our next paper is looking at what effective cyber board governance looks like, because again, I think it's an area where we just need to demystify a bit and offer some practical suggestions. Boards, in the light of what's happening with the SEC in the US, the fairly recent rulings in Australia around this, the fact that where the SEC leads, the EU follows, and so on and so forth. There will be boards who want to know, what are the 3 characteristics I'm looking for? What are the 5 things that can tell me that are a proxy indicator that this person would have a reasonable understanding of cyber and could realistically sit on my board as a NED and sort of be that bridge between us as board members who kind of know it's important but don't quite understand it, and the CISO who can't quite speak the board language. So, we really want to unpack that, and we want to make sure that there's a good understanding of the practical steps that boards can take in a demystified, simple way that can help them to, as Richard said, I mean, if this goes through, the demand is going to go through the roof, and there will be no shortage of people queuing up to sort of take those seats on boards, their coveted positions. So watch this space, but that's what we're working on at the moment is something that can be somewhat of a practical guide for boards who are trying to make sense of this without that depth of knowledge and expertise as a starting point themselves.
Do you see the rise of, with smaller businesses, there's been the rise of the kind of the fractional CFO. I can't afford the $150,000, $250,000 or more that a CFO might cost, but I still need more experience than my accountant can provide. Do you see a role for like fractional CISOs?
We more than see it. Yeah, we do it for a number of smaller, I'd say small to mid-size organizations. We call it virtual CISO, on the basis that it typically is it is remote and it's typically fractional. And we've been supplying virtual CISOs to companies for probably 7+ years, and have learned a lot through that process as well. I think one of the learnings is actually there has to be a minimum commitment, which is more than an NED type commitment for companies to make a real difference. I think when we started offering them, we were doing anything from a minimum of 2 days a month, but we realized, in fairly short term, in a fairly short time, that 2 days a month is really not enough to do anything, because you're not just there for governance, you're there to actually enact change.
Yeah. And
there's a very limited amount you can do in 2 days a month. So we now won't take one of those engagements unless it's at least 6 days a month. And that just sort of gives you the minimum feeling for, even at a fractional level, if you're not engaging at least 6 days a month, you really struggle to get stuff done, because you just can't push, can't make the changes quick enough and push the organization along. So yes, it's a big thing. We're seeing lots of companies starting to offer the same sort of service, but it means different things to different people. There's a very big difference between, security technology reseller selling a virtual CISO and, a strategy company selling a virtual CISO.
So is it sometimes kind of a partnership role between maybe like the CIO and the fractional CISO? So you have the CIO to implement things that come up in the discussions, but you have the fractional CISO that has the experience and the ability to communicate with the board a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, that is a workable solution. Again, the virtual CISO levels that we're seeing going in are not necessarily the board level people. They're sort of ex-information security managers who are, had a mid-level management job, who are going into a medium-sized enterprise as their virtual CISO. So again, they're more SMEs around understanding the day job a bit better and helping to build a plan and hold people's feet to the fire, but not necessarily doing that board level communication particularly well.
Gotcha. So kind of on the flip side, if you bring in a CISO who doesn't have support of the board, are they actually able to implement things?
In our experience, no. And that was definitely one of the findings for companies that go through CISOs pretty quickly. We know large companies that have had 4 in 4 years. I think the quickest, or the most we saw, which was quoted by, again, another search firm, is one of their big clients had 4 in 18 months. Ooh. And they were extremely worried about going to market again, because they didn't know what they wanted. They didn't know what they needed. They were scared of another bad hire or another rehire that didn't work out. So that tells you something about the organization more than it tells you about the candidate, where the organization is not ready to provide the right support, or is not the right environment, or cannot create the right environment for the CISO to be effective. And therefore you're going to get to this very quick place where the CISO says, well, hey, either I've got no money, or you're not letting me change anything, or you're not supporting me, or you just don't care about this enough to allow me to influence other people. That is, we do see that.
Yeah.
And then once you get in that place, you've got the, hey, I can take my skill set elsewhere for better pay, so I'm not willing. Oh, there's almost like a lower tolerance for friction.
Totally. Path of least resistance. Yeah. So why am I going to sit around here and do this job, and I'm going to really slave over this and make hardly any progress, where I can just move on and take some more money again and get more support.
And the board may have the same view also. This person's a little difficult to work with. Maybe we can just get somebody else. Let's just get rid of him and bring someone else in.
Yeah. And you raise essentially a really good point, which is that, this isn't a one and done. It's not just about fixing CISO leadership. It is also about having the right people and the right knowledge and expertise at board level. It is also a conversation about talent and how we sort of get more folks into the pipeline and up through the pipeline. And it is also a sort of a broader and complicated discussion about what effective risk management looks like in the cyberspace. And it's finding ways to unravel all of those 4 things and sort of fight the good fight on all 4 fronts, if you like. And you can't, one without the other 3 is not going to bring us a sustainable solution to an area of business which is just getting more important all the time.
So with respect of it being more and more important all the time, and this podcast is substantially about risks, what are the risks that these companies that aren't going to bring in a qualified CISO or aren't willing to implement their recommendations, or bringing in a CISO who isn't qualified, what are the risks that they're putting themselves under?
Well, I think fundamentally, if you're talking about what we'd call a bad CISO hire, effectively, and that leads to a number of different costs and risks, I would say. So just to sort of qualify that a little bit, when we say a bad CISO hire, we don't necessarily mean that the people are had bad intentions, but it just hasn't worked out for the company. And what we would say is a bad CISO would leave the organization in a slightly worse state or a worse state than when they found it, relative to how the industry has moved on. So it doesn't mean they haven't made any progress, but they haven't made progress at a quick enough pace just to keep up. Okay, and we sort of look at those types of scenarios, and there's clearly the cost of the bad hire financially, which is, we estimate to be at least $10 million for a typical enterprise organization, and that includes the cost of the CISO for a period of time, but it also significantly includes projects which either get stopped by the new CISO before they've delivered value, or get started because they have wanted to introduce some new stuff that they'd worked with before, and maybe those don't even see it to fruition after they've left. We estimate that to be about 25% of the actual security budget per year being wasted. So there's financial cost, but there's a huge cost on the team that sits underneath that, who typically we don't see as much churn with. We do see it's certainly different to other departments, because security is still a huge supply and demand issue, but we don't see the same level of churn at the next level down, the director level, typically within businesses. But for them, it's quite destabilizing. We know a lot of those level directors in companies who've had 3, 4, 5 different CISOs in as many years, and that is just crazy. Different priorities every year, can't finish anything off. Turning right, then turning left, and it's just very turbulent for them. So that's another sort of cost. Rachel mentioned it earlier, but there is an opportunity cost as well with all of this churn, which is we see cybersecurity as a differentiator these days. If you do it well, not only do you protect yourself, but you have better capabilities in your procurement processes. When you're bidding for tenders, you're able to demonstrate, a high level of maturity, which will support your investments, any investors coming in. And there are lots of things that CISOs are doing and security teams are doing to drive even top line revenues, whether that includes reselling of security services that they're using, that they've built internally, whether it's working with the marketing teams to exploit data in a more effective way, but without breaking any privacy laws or without risking the data any further. Or whether it's just being the ideas of I'll use an analogy. You don't hire a bodyguard so you can stay at home, right? You get a good bodyguard, and you can go and work in dangerous places, and that's the sort of analogy we've been using for done well. This can be a really good thing.
Yeah. Go on. I would say almost if you have a good cybersecurity team, you could take a little bit more business risk than you might otherwise be able to.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. And then from a risk point of view, I think if you consider that the churn is causing companies to be spinning the wheels for much of the time, and from our research, we felt that the typical company that had this problem was spinning the wheels for 2 out of every 3 years. They're effectively going backwards in that time while the industry is moving forwards.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time before this is laid bare in some significant ways, particularly with the regulation coming around, openness of reporting, and so on. We're just gonna see this problem laid bare.
Yeah, and it's kind of the ultimate asymmetry, isn't it? I mean, you have companies that are kind of either standing still or spinning round in circles or going backwards in the worst instances, but the bad guys aren't. They're charging ahead full force, and so it's kind of the ultimate asymmetric threat, really. And we're not making it easier for ourselves, we're making it easier for them. And why it's just so critical to get this role right. There isn't a minute to spare.
So how long do you guys see before things start to stabilize in terms of the right people that can be at the right companies, affecting change, meeting the growing threats, communicating well with the board, salary stability, tenure stability? How long do you say from now until that happens?
I'll go first, Rachel, if you don't mind. So there's a big if in front of this. If we do all the right things, And we've got views on what those right things need to be, including, building a new generation of leaders, including educating the boards, including finding creative talent gaps, creative ways to fill the talent gap, including companies taking a really pragmatic view to risk management, and also and developing a toolkit so that everyone can speak the same language and knows what good looks like and how to report and all that sort of stuff. Assuming we do all of those things right, for me, it's at least 10, if not 20 years before we're in a position where, the typical enterprise is in a good place.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that wholeheartedly. We've talked a little bit about the ways in which regulation can be unhelpful as well as helpful. And it remains to be seen sort of where things settle down with the SEC. I think one way in which regulation can be helpful is that it does provide an external jolt to the system. And so how we then ride that is really important in sort of helping to steer things in the right direction, if that's not mixing too many metaphors. But, so I think that could be, how could we shorten that time frame? Is I guess another way of asking the question, and regulation could be a positive influence on that if it's done well and we respond effectively, and then some kind of development in from the bad guys. I mean, you've got to think. It doesn't feel like the pressure is on as much as it should be internally right now.
Yeah,
and so I think we do also have to look externally at whether it's regulators or adversaries who might just help to quicken our pace slightly. But I think Richard's right. We're in this for the long haul. It's a marathon, not a sprint, if you might put it that way.
So for someone who's maybe at a director level and seeing this as an opportunity of, since this isn't a 1 year or 2 year, it's all going to be solved. This could be a career goal, a legitimate, viable career opportunity for someone that they think can get themselves in the position over the next 5 years where they could take on that role. What sort of things should they be looking at in growing their skill set to be able to advance into this role?
I mean, I would really encourage anybody who's in that position and sort of looking upwards and considering their options to think about the stuff which is around communications and leading through influence. Some of the, I guess, what we might sort of pejoratively call the soft skills, which actually are some of the hardest skills and some of the most critical in a business environment. It's about rounding yourself off as a leader, in particular as a business leader, understanding how you communicate effectively with people who don't do what you do for a job, have a different set of priorities to you, and after all, in many cases, often competing priorities for this particular profession. So I think those are the areas that are most important. And, there's a reason why we put communications as item number 1 on the agenda in this paper, because if you can't communicate, you can't really do anything else. As one of our interviewees told us, I think it was a chief technology officer, he said, look, you can fight as many hackers blindfolded with one arm tied behind your back as you like. But if you can't communicate to the board why cyber matters, you can't get the budget you need, you can't get the investment you need, you can't do your job. And so I think it's for would-be CISOs, that those are the types of skills that I would be looking to invest in if that were my career path.
Yeah, and I think in the reports, we go into quite a bit of detail around what are the habits of highly successful CISOs, and drill into those quite a bit, with recommendations both for organizations and also for individuals of what they can do to improve the chances of success, if you like.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, we've referred to the report in air quotes here a number of times. Where can people find the report?
So they can find it on our website, which is www.savanti.co.uk. We can put it in the notes for you to find it. It'll be under thought leadership, but there's a nice big banner to it on our homepage right now. This is the first of 4 that we're doing. The research that we embarked on actually gave us so much more data than we were able to put into one report. So the first one sort of outlines the problem and the perfect storm, and then goes into detail on what a good CISO looks like effectively and what their characteristics are. The second piece will be going into effective board governance of cyber, as Rachel alluded to, and then third and fourth piece will be looking at both the creative solutions to bridge the talent gap, and also what does a toolkit look like, or what does a toolkit need to look like, so that CISOs and boards can speak the same language and really, sort of catalyze that whole communications process and effectiveness and so on.
It sounds like an incredible series that it sounds like a lot of those things will apply outside of cybersecurity and CISO, but any department that may have communication issues with the board.
It's a really interesting observation, actually. I've spent a lot of the last 20 years working with the folks who head up physical security within corporations, and it was fascinating to me coming into this part of the security organization and finding that actually many of the challenges that CISOs are struggling with are things that I have seen chief security officers on the physical security side of things. So I think your observation is really smart, and there's much to learn for those who have a technical role, a technical leadership role within an organisation beyond just CISOs to take from the work we're doing, I hope.
Any final thoughts before we close out here?
Well, I would just one thing really, which is to encourage folks to take a look at the paper. We would love feedback. What we're trying to do with this work, as well as put great ideas out there that can have some practical impact, is also build a community of CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, and others who want to be part of the solution for our industry. So if you've got feedback, if you'd like to be interviewed for our next piece, if you think there's a piece that we should be writing that we haven't mentioned, get in touch. It's the best way to do that is insights@savanti.co.uk, and join our community and get involved.
And can people reach out to both of you on LinkedIn if that's more convenient for them?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we will make sure to include links to both of your links to your LinkedIn accounts.
That's right.
Richard, any final thoughts from you?
For me, I guess, this problem isn't going away anytime soon. And without, wanting to start preaching around how we fix this at grassroots level and in the schooling kind of arena, we do definitely need more support from the education community, to push this forward. We would love to see business schools talking about cyber and teaching cyber and how to effectively manage cyber risks in business courses, not necessarily MBAs, but and likewise we would also like to see more CISOs doing business courses. So if you're an aspiring CISO listening to this, or a business school thinking about your next MBA content or next business course content, then we'd love you to help us with this problem.
Those are a great start to addressing the issue. Richard, Rachel, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
It's great. Thanks for having us, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found this episode insightful, please share this episode with someone you know and leave a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Richard Brinson and Rachel Briggs can be found at easypray.com/153.